very happy to introduce Jorge Franceschi. He is the Director of Business Development at TrialCard. So since 2002, Jorge has been involved in pharmaceutical, biotech, and biologics research in a variety of roles, including clinical operations, finance, market intelligence, and business development at the site level, SMO, CRO, and now in the clinical supply solution and access at TrialCard. Past employment includes Sarkis Clinical Trials, Radiant Research, Covance, Interventional Concepts, MedPrimo Research as an independent consultant, Future Life LLC advisory board member, and the University of Florida VAMC Department of Neurology. Cumulatively, he has been involved in over 350 clinical trials, including phase 1 through 4, PKPD, vaccine, 510K submissions, vaccine research, and has conducted both pediatric and adult trials. And I'm very pleased to introduce Jorge.
All right, Dr. Tada, thank you so much for that. Let me just start sharing my screen here. Okay, wonderful. So thank you for that introduction. My name is Jorge Franceschi. I'm one of the business development directors at TrialCard, and I'm going to be talking today about case studies in decentralization, transforming patient accessibility, and how we do that through our offering at TrialCard, how we enhance supply process and maximize healthcare resources within the communities of research patients. So I struggled a little bit with this title because transforming patient accessibility, accessing patient, what does that mean? Does that mean patient recruitment? No, we're not in the patient recruitment space. However, there is data that suggests that decentralization efforts do have a very positive impact on recruitment and retention. And how we do that at TrialCard, how we play our role in the decentralized space, we do that through drug vouchers and coupons, which allows patients to get drug or medication therapy via local pharmacies or mail-in pharmacies, or we can use medical benefit vouchers, which allows medical services, exams, and procedures to be accessed at any medical facility. And this is done via universal electronic claim processes that are available in any institution that runs insurance. So through this process, these vouchers, whether they be drug or medical vouchers, we can move these tasks or these components from your brick and mortar sites to the local pharmacies and the local providers within that patient's community. So time for a change in the industry. Obviously, there are decentralized trial initiatives. Everyone on this call knows that there's a lot of process inefficiencies and waste within the clinical trial process. And COVID-19 obviously has been a positive force for change within this industry. This morning we had Craig Lipset talk this morning for his DTRA and how they want to democratize and accelerate clinical trials. This is actually their first press release they had back in December 2020. And there's a great comment here, is DTRA's efforts are aligned in the goal of making it possible for any patient anywhere to access trials with convenience and safety during the pandemic and beyond. So like Craig said this morning, there's been efforts. Decentralization has been happening for 17 years, but before COVID, we were maybe moving at 5 miles per hour, and in 2020, we got up to speed maybe at 55 miles per hour. But there's other organizations, and he had some nice slides showing all the different organizations that try to create efficiency and change in the industry. TransCelerate is another one. Their first press release was back in September of 2012. And their goal was to improve the quality of clinical studies and bringing new medicines to patients faster. How do you do that? You do that by creating efficiency. So there's a lot of inefficiencies in our space. Anecdotally, we're here that it takes 6 to 7 months on average to perform a clinical trial startup. Trials are taking 50% longer than anticipated. Clinical trial supply chain logistics are 25% of total R&D costs. Their waste is rampant. 62% of material package was not even used for clinical trial. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we know that there's just a lot of inefficiencies in our space. One of that I would like to mention is site payment. I mean, there are still studies out there that are taking 4.5 months or 140 days to reimburse sites. That's really not acceptable in 2021. And then we talked about COVID-19 and a force of positive change. And obviously the stay-at-home orders, the social distancing, the patients weren't coming in. Telemedicine was instituted. The FDA got serious about their guidelines for COVID-19. And so some statistics that have come out of 2020, 51% of large pharma agrees that in the next 2 years, they will run a clinical trial where the majority of activity occur in the patient's home. And now, non-large pharma companies are not as enthusiastic. They're at 25%. Maybe they don't think they have the financial resources or the infrastructure to conduct these types of decentralized trial, but there is obviously a movement for that. And then to what I was speaking to earlier, Medical Research Network says that moving certain trial activities into patients' homes has proven to increase recruitment by 60% and aids patient retention by 95% or more. So how do we fit into that? How does TrialCard help with the decentralization of these trials, creating efficiency, allowing patients to access these medications or these providers in the community? You see there two cards. The top card is what's called a drug benefit card or a drug voucher or coupon. This allows patients to go to any local retail pharmacy, CVS, Walgreens, and pick up study required medications, devices, ancillary supplies, anything in their community. Or if you want to go the direct to patient route, prescriptions can go through a mail-in pharmacy and product can be shipped directly to a patient home, whether it's in all 50 United States, Puerto Rico, or even Canada. The bottom card there is a medical benefit voucher, and that voucher can be taken to any medical provider in a community for the reimbursement of medical exams and procedures. So whether it's the drug card or the medical card, think of it as an insurance card designed specifically for the needs of your clinical trials. So through these cards, you can align your team efforts to decentralize your trials. And there's equitable and fair access to care. If you're relying on patients to use their own financial resources, their own personal insurance, it's not the same. A great example of this is in the diabetes space. If you're unfamiliar, insulin is very expensive. If a patient has a bad financial month, they might ration their insulin, which could negatively impact your trial. So a lot of sponsors are thinking about that. How do we make sure not only are they getting their investigational product, but getting these background medications? So through the cards, we can provide standard of care, comparator, rescue meds, ancillary supplies, and medical devices. We do a lot with glucometers, test strips, devices like Dexcom, continuous glucose monitoring, Abbott Freestyle Libres, a lot of product out there that can be used in that home setting. We can also provide access to routine exam and procedures and office visits in those patients' communities. Think about your rare and ultra rare diseases. A lot of times those patients are maybe traveling 2, 3. I did an autism trial where I had patients traveling 5 hours to my site. Why not leverage those institutions in that patient's home community for things like blood draws or imaging? Those are things that can be routinely done in that patient's own community, whether it's done in their home setting or if they just go down to the street and go to their primary care provider. So this allows patients to use those research within their own communities or their own home. So this is on the right-hand side is what a drug benefit RX study card looks like. It looks much like your insurance plan card. There's some acronyms that are the same. You have the BIN number, which is the bank identification number, which is how retail pharmacies are paid in real time. The RxPCN number is the pharmacy benefit management number, which lets the pharmacy know who designed the programming and the business rules of the card. The group number is important because when that pharmacy technician or pharmacist enters that group number, that tells them which medications are allowed on the drug plan, the dosage, the quantity, which physicians can and cannot prescribe for medications. And lastly, you have a cardholder ID number. Each patient gets a unique cardholder ID number for the duration of the trial to track all dispensations or all medical exams or activities during the trial. So the retail pharmacy process, as I mentioned, the sites have the cards, the investigator can write a prescription, and that is provided to the patient. They can go then to any local retail pharmacy and pick up those products. If it's a limited distribution drug or a high dollar product, then you might want to go through a mail-in pharmacy or a specialty pharmacy. Actually, you have to go through a specialty pharmacy. And then that product can be sent either to the site if it has to be medically administered, or we have clients now that are using home health research agencies that can do infusions and other medically administered processes in the patient's own home setting. On the back end, TrialCard reimburses that pharmacy in real time, and we also collect the dispensation metrics. So what was prescribed, what day, the quantity, the doses, who wrote a prescription, all of that is available in our web portal. I love this slide here because when you think about local retail pharmacies, there are 60,000 in the continental US. And that's more locations combined than McDonald's, Burger King's, Wendy's, Taco Bell, KFC, Domino's, and Dunkin' Donuts. So when you think about accessibility, patients have access typically to a pharmacy. Now, if they're in a very rural area, there might not be a Rite Aid or a CVS, but typically they're going to have access to a pharmacy. Now, the medical benefit reimbursement process, in that situation, what TrialCard does is they create a trial-specific medical benefit reimbursement program to meet the specific needs of that clinical trial. The patient is then typically enrolled through the program either via the phone or a website. I have yet to do a phone program, so 99.9% are web-based. The site goes in, puts in the information, and either a card is printed for use on site for maybe locally sourced and procured medications in a hospital setting, or it could be used for an off-site. And a great example of that is a fundoscopic eye exam. A lot of sites have to locally outsource those procedures. So in that situation, the PI makes the referral. They provide them with the card that they printed out through our portal. And then that card is presented at the provider's office. The provider files a claim for medical procedure, services, or medications. They utilize the card to cover the full costs of that product, or they can cover the remaining costs or the out-of-pocket costs. If it's appropriate to run patient insurance, then in that situation, patient insurance is run first, and then the RX study card, the voucher or coupon, picks up the out-of-pocket costs, so the patient always walks away with no cost to them. And because these are electronic claim processes, sites are paid typically within 6 to 8 days. So I shouldn't say site, the provider is reimbursed. So that slide earlier where I said 148 days, we can cut that down to 6 to 8 days as long as the files are done electronically. Now, there are paper filing methods, but in those situations, it may take 15 days or longer for the facility to get reimbursed. We've been in this space for a long time. TrialCard's been supporting clinical trials since 2009, and we've supported well over 200 trials. In the last 2 years, we've averaged about 80 trials at any one time. So one of the things we do is create an efficient supply process. So you can still do what's called a traditional bulk supply process, which is sourcing, procuring, depoting, getting all these products, and try to push that through for a decentralized platform. But our process fits in quite nicely with that. With all the data that we've collected since 2009, we can show that we can have a reduction in supply processes, the shortening of lead times, the savings of staff time, elimination of supply waste, saving in cost of resources, and minimizing risk of supply ownership. We do this through what we call our virtual clinical supply process, which means that the client does not pay for product until the moment that it is dispensed to the subject. So we hired some 4 third-party consultants. Each of them had over 15 to 20 years in the clinical supply space. We looked at the number of processes steps to start up, the number of weeks to start up, the number of hours required to start up, and the number of hours required to manage resupply post-startup. So this is comparing our virtual supply pharmacy card process versus the traditional bulk supply management. And this is assuming that everything goes as planned. This slide here is very busy, but if you look at the left-hand column, you'll see the clinical operations. They have to get through the draft, write the protocol, conduct their feasibility, and at a point in time, they hand that protocol off to an individual, either a clinical supply person or a ClinOps person. And between the time they get that protocol and then they actually order that formulary, there's about 10 steps in that process before it's actually ordered, including internal product assessment, determine product to buy, send RFP to vendors, so on and so forth. Now, between the time the product is ordered and then that formulary is delivered to the depot, there's 4 steps. There's receipt of the product, inspection of the product, placing that into the inventory and creating labels. The third stage there is the time between the product is delivered to the depot and then it's shipped to site. So the product has to be packaged. There has to be a batch review, batch record review, QA release, and IRT load. And then lastly, you have the last 2 steps before a patient's it's shipped to the site and the patient's dose. So you ship it to the site and you pay the label and packaging vendors that you're working with. Total, this is 20 steps. With our virtual or pharmacy card process, we cut it down to 4 steps: putting together an estimate, a contract, reviewing and approving the collateral, which is the cards and instruction memos and order forms, and then instructing the team members, whether they be monitors, site training, or any PMs or that sort. So in total, there's 16 fewer steps, an 80% reduction. What does that mean? I mean, if they're baby steps, who cares if they're 4 steps or 20 steps? So then what we did was we looked at calendar time to startup. So the time that protocol is put together and they actually dose that first patient. So the 4 sections there, those first 10 steps, takes about 31 business days. Stage 2, 4 steps, about 37 business days. Third stage, about 19 business days. In total, you're talking about 22 weeks or 5.5 months. With our process to get up and running, it takes about 6 weeks or 1.5 months, again, for those 4 steps. So a client is able to save 16 fewer weeks, which is a 73% reduction. So what about employee time to startup? So that person responsible, there's a flurry activity and then they have to wait. There's a flurry of activity. Again, those 4 stages, you're looking at a total of about 33 employee hours. With our process, you're talking about a total of 10 employee hours, which is a reduction of 23 or a 70% reduction. So this is a saving of 3 work days for that individual. Now, it's not a lot, but it keeps adding up as we go through these slides. Lastly, here's employee time for resupply, because obviously product has to be sent out. And our consultant said on average for about a 34-month clinical trial, it's going to be about 120 employee hours. With our process, just with routine business meetings, either bi-monthly or quarterly, you're talking about 6 employee hours, which is 114 fewer hours, a 95% reduction, saving that individual 14 days or 3 work weeks, which gives them time to focus on other things like managing IP or patient and recruitment. Whatever it is, it frees them up to conduct the task of the research. So on the left-hand side here, you're going to see the savings summaries. So total development time saved per trial on average is 16 weeks, and the total hours saved per trial is about 137 hours, which is 17 days or 3.5 weeks of employee time per managed trial. So what about costs? So we have some case studies that look at costs, and we talked to the same consultants. We looked at our processes. And what we did was, I have two case studies to share with you. One of these is the trial that never started, which is a real world evidence respiratory. This client wanted to conduct a real world respiratory trial. They completed the setup process. They recruited the sites. They were ready to go. And what happened was they had significant enrollment challenges. Actually, no patients were enrolled, and the sponsor terminated the trial after 6 months. So when you look at the scope of this trial, it was a big trial. They estimated that 25% of, they wanted to get, source and procure 25% of the total inventory for study startups. They had 200 sites, but they were going to start with an inventory enough to be prepared for 50 sites. The study would have 1,300 subjects, but they would start planning for 325. On average, patients would get 12 units, and they would have used about 20,000 units. But for startup, they would have at least 5,000 units. So these are your combination rescue inhalers. On the left-hand side here, you'll see the traditional bulk supply process. So there's a lot of operational costs with that. There's sourcing, procuring, depot, shipping, labeling, all of that. And then on the right-hand side, you see our RX study card, the virtual clinical supply process. The operational cost for startup for the client would have been about $68,600 based on our consultant's feedback. With our process, the client would or actually did spend $17,500, which is a savings of about $51,000 or 75%. Now, the medication cost for that inventory to pre-purchase, the client would have spent $2.7 million. Now, with our process, clients do not pay until the moment product is dispensed to the subject. Since not a single unit was dispensed, the cost was zero. So the client saved $2.7 million. So looking at both, the client saved $2.8 million using our pharmacy card process. So what if they had enrolled? What if they hadn't had issues? If they had executed that trial, enrolled all of their subjects, their operational cost for managing that would have been $1.2 million. With our process, it's about $417,000, which is a savings of 67% or to over $800,000. The medication cost, again, if they provided all the units with overage, it was about $14.9 million. Our process would have costed the client $10 million to just over $10 million, which is a savings of $4.5 million. So combined between our purchase process and savings on medications, we were talking about a $5.3 million saved to clients. Now, this case study here was for a phase 3 diabetes trial. Glucometers were disappearing. The depot didn't monitor expiration dates, and a lot of product expired. Why? Because like a lot of trials, there was delays upon delays upon delays. Pallets of glucometers had to be destroyed, and the product was no longer available. The only glucometers that were available were in the commercial distribution channels in the pharmacies, which we could provide through a pharmacy voucher or card. Again, the scope of this trial, 42 months, 292 sites, 1,293 patients. They would have needed about 27,000 units of products. And we're talking about a diverse formulary, oral hypoglycemic agents, insulin, glucometers, test strips, lancets, whatever they needed, they could get through this study formulary. If they had bought all of these, if the management of running the depot would have cost the client about $2.2 million. With our process, you're talking about a $387,000 cost to the client, which is a savings of 1.8. The physical inventory, eliminating that, you go from 4.8 to 3.1 million, which is a savings of 1.6. And combined, you're talking about a 3.4 million savings. So obviously, time is money. On average, we save clients about a net time savings of 80%. And then we also save an average monetary savings of about 45%. So a little bit more about site reimbursement. I just touched on that using the medical benefit vouchers. This is an alternative to the pharmacy model. So maybe you don't want to use a local retail pharmacy or ship directly to the patients. This is done a lot in the oncology space or for rescue medications. Maybe you don't want to do reimbursement model, so internally managing reimbursement processes. If you have 500 sites, you don't want to receive 500 invoices charging you for whatever it is they're charging you at different prices at each site. So this process helps eliminate that. And we also eliminate the use of debit cards. So obviously with debit cards, there's diversions. Patients can take that and they can use it. My favorite example, cigarettes and beer or whatever, or lotto tickets. So with this process, you eliminate that. The medical benefit voucher looks like your drug benefit voucher. There's just a few different acronyms, but for the most part, you have the payer ID instead of the BIN. You still have a group number. There's no longer a PCN because there's no pharmacy benefit management. And then there's a plan and member ID number to track everything. We've done over 30 programs in the medical benefit copay program. We've enrolled over 200,000 patients in programs, and we've paid out over 1.5 million in medical benefit claims. So what are some of the benefits? It's more convenient than other reimbursement processes. It's easy, it's fast, and cost effective. It integrates directly into existing billing workflows. Institutions that process insurance claims, they know exactly what to do when our card or voucher is presented. It's processed like United Healthcare or Blue Cross Blue Shield, whatever it is. When they do their drop down, it'll have all those companies and there'll be a line down there, TrialCard, and they'll put that in, and that's how they get reimbursed. We reimburse those providers directly. And as I mentioned, typically within 6 to 10 days, this process protects against fraud and abuse. There's improved data reporting. Every transaction is captured and is available in our web portal. And we can even interface with other vendors if you want that data with periodic data dumps, so it's available to your teams. That's something we can do. And there's no need to go to banks for artwork approval when you have to use a debit card. And we only have a few minutes, so Q&A. Any questions, concerns, comments? What do we have?
So Jorge, thank you very much. I think we have a question here that's, how does the use of community laboratories affect the DM and gathering of lab normals and monitoring?
Okay, so there's two ways. So we don't have the data on the back end. We don't have an interface for that. So the site, the local site, or whoever's conducting the study will still have to use a patient release of information and that sort of thing. However, having been a site director, if I ever outsourced anything locally, I would partner with those. If there were specific tasks that maybe were outside the regular clinical scope, I would talk to them, give them the heads up. But right now, there's no interface. That's something that maybe we can look at in the future. So when that provider does that test, that exam, whatever it is, they can go into a portal, and part of that reimbursement is for doing that extra lift at their facility. But you're living in the future. Who is that? Lejana, you're living in the future. We're trying to get there.
And Jorge, as we discussed previously, I think, one of the things that's really important is participant retention in clinical trials. That they're our most valuable resource. So, for example, in oncology trials where there are predictable adverse events, we rely a lot on insurance covering these sort of co-medications to treat these adverse events. But sometimes, there's still co-pays and things. And so I think that what TrialCard offers is really, it's terrifically advantageous for companies to retain patients who would otherwise just say, you know what, I can't afford it. I'm not going to stay in the study.
Right. So most of our clients pick the what's called the primary benefit. So large pharma always, well, not always, but pretty much does that. They pay for 100%, whether it's oncolytic co-therapy or imaging. But smaller pharma doesn't have that. And in those situations, if it's appropriate, if patient insurance can be run, then our card just covers that copay or out-of-pocket cost. So at the end of the day, like you said, they're participating, they're getting that benefit that's going to help with recruitment and retention, and it's going to create some incentive for them to continue to participate. And it enhances their care. I mean, it enhances patient safety as well, making sure that they get access to these medications.
Yep, and another piece of data is again, you're able to actually capture the information, for the adverse event and how it was managed. And I think that that's terrific because that's something in clinical trials that we really struggle with.
Right. So in your example you gave, we run programs where we'll provide those oncolytics, but then we'll also help manage those symptoms. So if they need antidiarrheal or antiemetics or whatever it is, that would be a hybrid program. You have your standard of care oncolytic. If it's a limited distribution going through that specialty pharmacy, it's shipped either to the site or that home setting. But then if they start having symptoms, they'll have another card. They can go to their CVS or Walgreens and have that prescription filled. Or if you wanted the direct-to-patient route, they would notify the site. They would transmit the order in, and then product could be shipped directly to their home. So there's a lot of ways that this offering can be used, and we can get pretty ingenious. And I'm sure there are ways that we are not using in certain therapeutic areas. So I'm always happy to talk to new folks and new therapeutic areas because, if it's commercially available, we can provide that.
Yeah, I think that's terrific. All right. Well, again, thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you again, Jorge, for your presentation. And I will be transferring now, everyone,